How do you tell a solid, trustworthy proposal from one that sets you up for scope creep? When do change orders signal real surprises, and when are they just part of the pricing strategy? In this episode, we'll show you how to read proposals like a seasoned buyer. From deliverables and assumptions to exclusions and dependencies, you'll get a clear framework of how to avoid costly surprises. Welcome back to Night Grandpa's JD Edwards. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield. And if you have ever sat down with a proposal that sounded good only to watch the project spiral out of scope and budget, this episode is for you. We're diving into the red flags hiding in plain sight and how you can spot them before you sign. Joining me is Stuart Peterman, an account executive here at ERP Suites, who's reviewed and written more proposals than most people have ever read. Stu, welcome back. And for those that haven't seen you on the pod before, can you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. And excited to be back. I think this is number 3 for me. I've been counting the days. Um, my name's Stuart Peterman. I'm an account executive at ERP Suites based out of Denver, Colorado. But I've got a pretty long history in tech sales in general, 4 of which on the professional services side. Working especially in the JD Edwards community and the Oracle community. Prior to that, I was at NetSuite and Oracle for a period of time. And then before that was at Salesforce. So I've seen a lot of different statements of work. I've seen a lot of different approaches from professional services organizations, and some good, some not so good, but wanted to kind of help those out there understand what they can look for to make sure that an SOW is all encompassing and that it's not going to go off the rails at any point as much as we can.
Yeah. And you've been in this space for a long time now. You have been around a lot of different proposals when it comes to the tech consulting side of it, and specifically JD Edwards, which is what this podcast specializes in. So to kick off, why do so many ERP or even consulting proposals lead to budget issues and scope creep?
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe less exciting of an answer than you were hoping. But I think the real culprit for why scope creep happens is because either customers are not as forthcoming as they should be in the discovery process, or maybe the professional services or consulting firm isn't asking the right questions. I think oftentimes when I've seen projects go sideways or budgets really increase and change orders are required is when companies just don't give that consulting firm the full scope of what they need. Unknowns are really what cause scope creep. Unknowns on the professional services side and unknowns on the customer side. So it's not always that the customer doesn't share that information or they're too tight-lipped about what they should be sharing with the consulting firm. Sometimes they just don't know. And same on the other side. Sometimes the consulting firms just don't know the right questions to ask. So in my experience, that's really what causes projects to expand and balloon past what the SOW would have dictated.
Yeah, and maybe go a little bit further. What are some of the most common flaws that you see in these proposals that set projects up to fail?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it can be some ancillary application that's connected to, let's say, an ERP system or connected to a CRM system that causes, that application, if it's upgraded, to just crash or to fail. Sometimes it's a requirement that they didn't explicitly state in the beginning that now they want later in the game. And it causes some friction on both sides because sometimes on the consulting side they say, well, you're telling us this now, and then on the customer side oftentimes they're saying, well, yeah, we've only known this because it's our system. We didn't know that it wasn't regular for every company out there. The one thing that I've come to understand is that there are no two companies that are the same. There are no two ERP systems or CRM systems that are the same. There are no two processes that are the same, and there are no two people that are the same from one company to the other, whether it's a controller that wants a specific accounting function, or a warehouse manager that wants a specific warehouse operation function for a picker. It's There's a lot of variation, and sometimes everyone thinks what they do is what everyone else does, and that's really almost never the case.
Yeah, and to dive deeper into the people side of it, do
Mhm.
clients generally know how to evaluate these documents, or are they more relying on the vendors to kind of spell it out for them?
Yeah, I've seen all ends of the spectrum of SOWs. I've seen very vague SOWs that kind of allude to getting a project done in a specific amount of time without much mapping or planning to specific milestones or key points in that project that they want to hit, who's involved in that, what time frame they're planning on hitting it, and what it takes from the customer side. Oftentimes, customers don't really realize what resource requirements are going to happen on their side. So, when it comes to people, I think that the real pitfall here is that you're not asking the questions that are circling around in your head. You'll see an SOW, it looks fine to you. You may even get a little bit of, in the sales world, what we call happy ears, which is I'm hearing everything I want to hear. I'm hearing that this project can be done in the allotted amount of time that I want it to get done. And in reality, you're not asking the tough questions around how we plan on hitting it in that period of time, what resources might be required from my end, the customer's end,
Mhm.
and what sort of meetings might be required between the two sides. So sometimes you'll undergo a project in the middle of busy season. You just can't spare the extra people, and that causes the project to go a lot longer. And therefore, if it goes a lot longer, it typically is going to be more expensive. Um, so the pitfalls, really, just to summarize it, are around not asking the right questions or not asking the questions that you're thinking about in your head. So, you know, there are some stupid questions, I guess, but uh, very rare. So, if you have a question in your head, chances are it's a good question. So ask it. Uh, if it's a good professional services firm, like I believe ERP Suites is, we're always happy to answer questions or go into more detail on a statement of work. It's good if we both understand what's going to occur during that project time frame.
Yeah, and when it comes to the language side of it, are some of those maybe stupid questions, but maybe real good questions, do they come from unclear language that might be in some of these deliverables or maybe assumptions?
Yes, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the language in a statement of work or a contract or even a proposal is vague on purpose. And it's vague because it has to be. It has to be somewhat vague because there are a lot of potential options and opportunities and events that can arise throughout an evaluation cycle. So, a lot of it can seem really vague. Contracts are often written in vague ways. So to ask to elaborate on a very specific clause or an area in the contract that cites anything around timeline or resource requirements or resource allocations, oftentimes it can be vague. So I would encourage every customer out there to just ask questions. It's not an attack on us if you're asking us to elaborate on a specific part of a statement of work or an MSA. Typically, we're happy to do it.
Yeah. And with the vagueness of some of these documents, you can see some change orders that could be placed in there in the future. Is that something that you've seen of a lot of change orders utilized by vendors just to get extra revenue at the end of the day? Or is it more strategically they're using the change orders if they absolutely have to?
Well, there are, in my mind, three different change order types. There are
Mhm.
change order types that an organization in the consulting world or the professional services world has already kind of um, built into the statement of work to say, hey, if this is our understanding as of right now. If this understanding changes because some of what your requirements are change, or there are things that arise that we weren't aware of, we've reserved the right to go through the process of doing a change order. And those are necessary, they are stated beforehand, and I think they're responsible. They're ethical, they're responsible. If the client changes their requirements after the sales or the statement of work is signed off on, then you do have to readjust your thinking, or else, you know, consulting firms and professional services organizations just wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be profitable anymore, and they would cease to
Mhm.
be able to operate in this space. So that is a necessary part of a statement of work or a review of an overall project or initiative. The second that I've seen is due to, I don't like to use the term negligence, just not being as prepared as they would like to be or they should be, not asking the right questions, and therefore a change order is required. Now, there's a little bit of fault on both sides at that stage where, yeah, there's some fault on the customer for not being totally forthcoming with the information that is required of us. Um, but then on the consulting firm side, there's a little bit of responsibility there too for not asking the right questions and not making it known that, listen, this is our understanding of the scope here. If it changes, we do have to change our resource allocation, and we would then have to change the amount that this may cost. Um, the other side's time and materials. You give a rough estimate, you bill them for what time it actually takes. And those are a little bit harder to peg. Those are a little bit harder to nail down in terms of what they could be. But at the same time, if it's a good organization that's keeping you in the loop at every step of the way, you will know and be able to track where you are in relation to where we thought we would be in the course of that project. The third, unfortunately, is a reality in the space. I can't say I've ever seen, at least in my role in a consulting firm, anyone either in my company or in any of the companies that I have worked with or been a part of the evaluation process with, purposefully underbidding or underbaking a statement of work in order to get the business and then change ordering them. I haven't seen it firsthand as I've been a part of the professional services side, but I have seen it a few times when I was an account executive at a larger company that had a slew of professional services organizations that I would then interview or speak with as the account executive for the product side. Um, it's been blatant in some cases. It's been a little bit less blatant in others, but I have seen it, and it does exist, and that's an unfortunate reality. But if you are able to kind of catch it in your review of a statement of work,
Yeah.
sometimes you can get ahead of it. If you're looking at a really vague statement of work and it's a pretty big project, you have the right as a customer to ask questions about if we could better define the timeline, the scope, and so on. And frankly, those organizations that I saw that would underbid and then change order those companies, they had a hard time. Most companies are not happy about a change order halfway through a project, and sometimes those companies refuse. And they'll say, all right, well, this is where your stop is. You can get off here, and we'll bring in another company that can take over where you left off. So I wouldn't say it's good business practice
No, definitely
from an
isn't.
ethical standpoint or from a an actual revenue standpoint. But unfortunately, it does exist.
Yeah. So let's maybe go into a little bit of how can you negate this? Let's make it a little practical. Say I've got a proposal in front of me. What red flags should I be scanning for?
Yeah. So if it's a larger statement of work, this doesn't always apply to, let's say, if you're doing maybe a 20-hour statement of work to build an orchestration for a specific process. Um, the time frames and the uh, kind of the hours allocated to the various weeks, months of that statement of work is a good area you can look at closely to understand if this professional services organization is really taking into account all the factors. If they're really looking into and scrutinizing and really being detail oriented around their statement of work. That's a really good place to look. If they have kind of really standard metrics, this week is going to be user acceptance testing, or this week is going to be discovery, or this week is going to be, when we actually implement the solution. The more vague the terminology, especially related to the timeline, the more you should be asking questions. The same goes for the overall deliverable section. In many statements of work, there is a services to be provided section. And sometimes those sections are really, really detailed and they go into, a lot of description of what exactly we're going to provide when we deliver on this project. That's a good sign. You want those statements of work to be lengthy, to be detailed. And if they're not, if they're really vague, you should be asking questions around why we think we can hit a specific goal timeline, or a specific budget that you and your company have set for a project like this. Um, Typically, unless it's a really, really uh, vague time and materials that you don't know really what is required and we don't know what is required, and we have that mutual understanding that this one's going to be time and materials, and we'll keep you abreast of the situation, but we're going to have to play this one by ear a little bit. um, if it's not a project like that, I would really ask lots of questions around the deliverables, the services section, the services out of scope section, because that should also be very detailed, is what we won't be doing in this project and what you or your team would be accountable for providing. Um, Along with that, required resources, or another really good area I've seen is the assumptions clause. This is what we assume based on what we've talked to you and your team about. If those assumptions are incorrect or off base, you should correct them. It will only affect both parties negatively if our assumptions and our understanding of scope is incorrect.
Right. And to maybe backtrack a little bit of if you do see one of those vague-ish where there is that understanding, but that would really open the door for maybe a change order. So what would a strong change order policy look like? And how could you maybe spot a weak one?
Yeah, so a strong change order policy is typically in the form of a group of sections, but also a disclaimer. And in many cases, there are disclaimers in these statements of work that will say something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, this is our current understanding. We have given you this statement of work based on the information provided and perhaps even the history, the customer history, if it's a recurring client from a consulting firm standpoint. And then it is really outlined in a detailed services to be provided, or maybe another way to phrase that section, and then services that are out of scope section. So to cover the consulting firm, typically they will say, this is our understanding of scope. We're going to be providing these services. It's going to take us around this amount of time. That breaks down typically into a number of hours, or in some cases, if it's outside of the United States, days. Use day rates in a lot of cases. And then this is what's out of scope. This is what you and your organization are going to be uh, entitled to provide. And then in the services to be provided, break it down. This is what we want to get in the initial discovery phase, because in many cases there's an additional discovery or an assessment that happens after the statement of work. Then we put together our plan of action. then we build and we deploy this solution, or we go through and we implement this upgrade, and then we account for the retrofit, and then we go through user acceptance testing, and then we provide documentation. Um, and then there's a really extensive deliverable section. So, really, what you're looking for is detail. And if in the assumptions clause, you are looking at some things that you didn't know that you provided, or perhaps even someone else in your organization may have provided that could be incorrect, it's really important for you and your company to really read that top to bottom, start to finish, understand what you are going to be accountable for and what you are not, understand what your resources and your resource requirements are going to be. And then if it's really, really vague for a really complicated project, I would review it and then maybe ask for more specific terminology in there to protect both you and the consulting firm, because the last thing you want is to budget a project for you to get excited and for you to be happy that you're coming in under budget, and then two-thirds of the way through it, you and the consulting firm are now at odds because they've come back to you and said, hey, we're way over budget on this. We've got, 20% more hours already than we proposed for the entire project, and we're in week 30 out of 50. So it, it's worth your time to read into that and make sure you understand everything that's being said. If you don't understand what's being stated in that statement of work or in that MSA, ask. It's kind of like no good consulting firm will be upset that you're asking questions about it. Um,
Yeah.
it's just a part of the process, and we account for it in time, and we're happy to do it. As an account executive, if there are questions that I can't answer, I can bring in an additional resource that can. So never be afraid to ask.
So, are there signs that a vendor is intentionally vague to stay flexible, or is it worse to like profit later?
It really depends on how open the dialogue is between you and the customer. If there's really open dialogue, it's a mutual understanding that, we know that there's a problem here. We do not know the root cause because really a litany of different reasons. It can be that the customer doesn't know where to find the root cause and therefore can't share that with the consulting firm or professional services firm. It can be because it's a new problem, and maybe a lot of companies are experiencing it. No one's really figured out how to resolve it, and there's going to be a certain amount of digging and sleuthing, I guess, to get to the root cause of that problem. Really, what you want to look for is how open is the dialogue, and really, as a consulting firm employee, the customers that I work with best are the ones that are the most honest and upfront with me. We're not here to spread your information. We typically have MNDAs signed anyway. If that were something that we wanted to do, we wouldn't be able to do it legally, although it's not. Um, Really, the lack of information sharing is where I see these things go sideways. Now, the opposite end of this is I have seen really vague statements of work. Um, I've seen them done by really savvy organizations that do it maliciously and intentionally. Again, not in the JD Edwards space. I've yet to see that, which is a good thing. Um, but then there are just vague statements of work because perhaps the consulting firm is young. It's not as well established. There aren't as many employees. Maybe they're early in their lifespan as a consulting firm, and maybe the CEO is writing statements of work, and he's also doing a lot of the legal stuff, and then they're also, going through and doing marketing and sales. So, they just don't have the time to devote to a really thorough statement of work. Um, but I think it really all depends on if it passes the smell test. If you, as a customer, read through that statement of work, you find it to be very vague for a project that's fairly complicated, and to the tune of hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, and you ask them to elaborate on specific subsections or maybe add specific detail to a section of a statement of work or a contract, and they push back on you, or they are unwilling to answer any questions around it, or they may not know, and you can see them kind of fumbling with their words. Those are signs that you should probably dig deeper and make sure that those concerns are addressed. Um, if I get caught in an area where someone asks me for additional detail and I simply don't know because I'm not the subject matter expert, I'm an account executive and I need to loop in an additional resource. It doesn't take that much work, and it's actually typically pretty easy. Our resources make themselves pretty available for questions. Uh, just this morning, I asked 4 different people 4 different very technical questions that I just could not answer on a call myself. And typically, my talk track around that is, it's a great question. I could try to answer that, but I'm afraid I'd be kind of talking out of school, or I just wouldn't know all the intricacies of that. Let me talk to a resource like, let's say, Tim Kramer for IBMI, or
Yeah.
Luke over in our x86 private hosting practice. Those sorts of things are really easy to go and ask my coworkers about. So if you encounter a situation where someone pushes back pretty hard on you asking a question that is really centered around a vague subset of a statement of work, that is a red flag, and you should consider it a red flag, and you should push a little harder to get them to answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you can't have that conversation with a customer where you're trying to build that relationship, you're trying to build that trust, that's a tremendous red flag if they're not willing to give you the answer or at least find it. Because, yes, most sales executives, they're not going to know the answer off the top of their head, but they know somebody that does. So, at the end of the day, if you're having those issues with those conversations, that's one of the biggest red flags that you could possibly see in this.
Yeah. I'm not saying
So,
run, but I am saying don't don't stop asking that question just because you get a little resistance. You should hold firm in that, and maybe get them to bring in a couple of other people so that they can go into that in more detail. Because yeah, that is certainly a red flag.
there's so much that goes into the trust side of it, but maybe there's an issue on the client side of maybe they're just overwhelmed by a proposal. What would you say to a buyer who is feeling overwhelmed trying to evaluate one of these proposals?
Yeah, I think it's probably easy to get overwhelmed by one of these proposals. It's a lot easier for me to read through one of our statements of work because they're typically written using similar language, although they can be larger or smaller based on the requirements. So even when I started at ERP Suites, coming on about 2 years ago, when I first looked at our statement of work, it was a little bit overwhelming to read through. So I don't blame a customer for feeling that way. I think if you're feeling overwhelmed by what a what language exists in a statement of work, just ask. I think you can ask your fellow coworkers, especially if they've worked with that specific consulting firm in the past, or you can ask the company themselves. Typically, I would say in 99.9% of all cases, no one at a consulting firm is attempting to pull the wool over your eyes, because
Yeah.
if you don't understand it, chances are we're going to get in an argument with each other down the road, and there's going to be some friction, and we don't want that either. We want you to understand what's going to happen, what time frame it's going to happen in, what you're going to be asked to do, what we're going to do from our standpoint. I think it's a partnership. It's an ongoing, in some cases decades long partnership from one company to the other. So the better we understand each other, the better we'll work together. So I
Yeah.
guess all I can say, and maybe there are other things that you can do to understand it a little bit better, just ask. If you ever have a question or you ever feel overwhelmed, ask someone from that consulting firm or from your company to explain it to them like they're 5 years old. That's kind of what I always ask. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
what if what if I was 5? How would you explain this to me? And
Yeah.
more often than not, the people that know their stuff can explain it in a way that is easy to understand if you don't really know that very well. I kind of make a career out of that.
But if you're evaluating a proposal or already mid-project and seeing red flags, ERP Suites is here to help. We've helped JD clients decode proposals, rescue struggling projects, and avoid costly mistakes. Reach out to our consulting team at erpsuites.com to schedule a proposal review or a project check-in. Let's make sure that your next move is a confident one. But that's a wrap for today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. Huge shout out to you, Stu, for breaking down the red flags that buyers need to understand. If you got value from this episode, subscribe, share it with your team, and leave us a rating. Until next time, evaluate wisely, modernize confidently, and keep your projects on track. Catch you next time.